tell me more about sort of the business side of this startup. So, there's a lot of scientists, founders out there might be listening to this podcast. They've got their own ideas for starting a business with some sort of technology or maybe algorithm that they have that they think could be useful. Like, what was your experience of trying to raise money, trying to create a sale, managing sort of the financial side of this business?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of learnings. I think obviously starting a company, there's a lot of your thinking really goes into just spending time with customers, right? And understanding what is the problem that they're willing to pay money for. And that's something, I was thinking about earlier today as well. I was like, if I want to, build something that can be really productized, what is really the bridge between, doing research and getting that into a market, and hopefully, for it to be impactful and useful. And I think sometimes you really need to approach the research problem from a perspective of, how do I make this useful? And so being really close to your customers, right? Whether that's like pharma or in our case, it was, talking to battery manufacturers. When we initially started, we just did, a ton of outreach, just really reaching out to all the companies in the space that we knew of. And also just like leveraging our own contacts. We knew someone at Tesla, for example, and he was a VP there. And so he was super helpful in being like, hey, I'll connect you to, a few people that I know that might be interested in this. And so initially, we would go into the call not being like, hey, this is a problem. Here's our solution. What do you think? But instead, we'd be like, tell us, your top 3 pain points. Walk us through your entire value chain and like where are the biggest sort of inefficiencies that you see right now. And so really approaching it from like a problem discovery perspective rather than slapping on your solution and just asking for validation there. So that was the first thing we did. And I think that was really helpful in identifying a problem that people were willing to pay for. But also when you think about, pricing models and how much can you really charge them, you need to understand what is the value you're adding. And how much can you charge based on that? And so I think understanding the current value chain was really helpful in being able to do that and get that data to then price our models. But then also it was a great way to sort of build like an initial discovery board, I would say, of companies that were like, hey, this piques our interest. Like we might be, if you have a solution for this, like we would love to use it. And so we sort of had a list of companies that gave us that initial like spark. And what we would do is we, just using open source data that we found, we built sort of an initial model, got some results from that, and we would just send them updates every few weeks being like, hey, this is a result we got. What are your thoughts on this, right? And then eventually that led into, translating 1 or 2 of those companies into real pilots because they were very interested, and so they ended up giving us, data from their manufacturing facilities, and we'd use that to then like update the models and train them. And so I think that was a really helpful process, not approaching it really as like intentionally trying to sell to them, but really just understanding the problem. So that I would say is more sort of on, I guess, like the pricing side. And then raising money, I think, is really, a lot of it is just understanding how to sell what you're working on. And so I think part of that for us was making it really clear why we wanted to work on this problem. I think if you talk about sort of the mission-driven impact that you want to make, that really helps. I think a lot of VCs obviously want to see that to understand, are you really in this for the right reasons, and are you willing to stick through it even when things get hard? And so I think that was really useful. And then also, again, a lot of it is just knowing the right people and reaching out to people in the space. And so, just asking contacts that we had. Hey, do you know anyone at this firm, or people we can chat with? And again, just really approaching it with like we're building this thing, let us just keep you updated, and potentially, if we raise in the future, we might reach out again. And so I think that was really a key theme in all of this, was it was never really intentional. Like we wanted to start a company, or, we wanted to raise money. It was always like, it felt like the right thing. It was what we needed to do. And we had just, started building those relationships to get to a point where it made sense to do that.
I love that insight, really staying close to your potential customers and in a way almost co-creating with them by really understanding their needs and then prototyping that, sharing that back with them for feedback, not necessarily even trying to sell them something, but then ultimately that leading to a couple of maybe, access to interesting data sets that you might not otherwise have, and then actual clients for your product.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand that the sales cycles are really long, right? If you're working in any market that's where you're trying to really disrupt the way things are working, if whether that's like pharma or whether that's like, in our case, battery manufacturers, like it's just obviously there's certain way that things have been done for ages. And if you're trying to really come in and say, hey, we're going to change the way things are done, it's really an iterative process. And so the sales cycles do end up being really long. But I think if you build that initial sort of relationship with them, it helps sort of shorten that period as well, because they start to trust you. They see that you're really diligent about working on the problem.
Well, in some ways, I feel like, gosh, a few years ago, everybody was talking about EVs. There was a lot of investment happening there. A lot of people were buying them. Then, it seemed that that's dampered down. People were saying, we're having trouble selling EVs. And yet there still seems to be excitement in the space. So I think just a couple of weeks ago, BYD, one of the largest EV manufacturers in the world, had this, glitzy PR release about how they have a new battery that can be charged in 5 minutes that can get you to, 80% or 100% capacity, almost equivalent to filling up your car with gas. And that was really exciting. And so there still seems to be a lot of investment in R&D in this space. Like, what do you make of sort of the state of battery tech today? Is this still a space that you would encourage folks to, jump into as you did?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a ton of problems that are still unsolved, and people are trying to work on them. And obviously, it's something that'll take us decades, right? It's not something that I think will get solved in like a year or two. But at the same time, I think we're sort of at the stage where there's a lot of people working on a lot of different things, and I think it is just a lot of testing that needs to go into validating that these are long-term solutions. And also, like you mentioned, really thinking about like the practical aspect of it. Can we do this at a large scale? Can we manufacture this chemistry at a large scale? And how do we, sell it and really test it in the right way? And so I think generally, a lot of cool work. I definitely think there's more smart people we need working on these problems.